Your best birthday party in all 4 years? Yeah.
Thank you, Daddy.
You're welcome, baby. I love you very much.
He was shot and killed right outside of this apartment.
Be very careful. I've got answers that I don't think you know I know.
Your best birthday party in all 4 years. Thank you, Daddy. Edgar Jennings believed he was giving his daughter the perfect day. He had no idea that before the sun set on February 9th, 2018, he would be shot to death in a gas station parking lot. The people responsible weren't strangers. They were the people who should have been celebrating with him. It started as the perfect morning. Edgar Jennings, 35. Spent the afternoon of February 9th, 2018, doing what fathers do when their daughters turn 4, showering her with gifts, recording her laughter, making sure she knew she was loved. The apartment in Fort Walton Beach glowed with birthday decorations. Streamers hung from the ceiling, balloons clustered in corners, and wrapping paper littered the floor. His daughter tore through presents with the unbridled joy only a 4-year-old can muster, her squeals of delight filling the small space. Edgar stood behind his phone camera, capturing every moment. He asked her the question every parent asks, the one that sounds silly but matters anyway. Is this your best birthday party in all 4 years? She didn't hesitate. Yeah, thank you, Daddy. You're welcome, baby. I love you very much. The exchange was unremarkable, tender, ordinary, the kind of moment that happens in homes across the country every single day. Edgar didn't frame it as anything more than that a father making sure his daughter felt celebrated, documenting a milestone the way millions of parents do. He filmed her smile, her excitement over each new toy, the way she ran to hug him between unwrapping gifts. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that he was creating evidence. The video would matter, but not the way he thought. It wouldn't be a memory to revisit on her 5th birthday or her 10th. It would become a timestamp, a marker of the last afternoon he had left. He had no idea this was the last full day of his life. The audience does. That gap is the entire weight of the scene. The party wound down as evening approached. His daughter's energy finally flagged, her eyes heavy from the sugar and excitement. Edgar cleaned up wrapping paper, put away toys, and tucked her in. The apartment settled into quiet, ordinary quiet, the kind that feels like safety. It wasn't. Somewhere beyond that apartment, plans were already in motion. A gun had been purchased, a price had been agreed upon, the timeline was set. Edgar went about his evening unaware that every remaining hour was borrowed, that the woman orchestrating his death was counting down the same clock he thought was just marking another night. The video he recorded that afternoon captured a father in an unguarded moment, filming what he thought was simply a birthday. By midnight, the man in that footage would be gone. The little girl who told him it was her best party ever would wake up the next morning to a world where her father no longer existed. Her 4th birthday, the one he'd worked so hard to make special, would become the day she lost him. The woman who made sure of it was already counting the hours. And she was the mother of his child. The party ended the way birthday parties do. Wrapping paper cleared away, a tired 4-year-old tucked into bed. The kind of quiet that settles after the noise fades. Edgar's girlfriend, Stacy, had already turned in for the night. The apartment fell into the ordinary stillness of a household winding down. Edgar stepped outside. It was an unremarkable action, the kind of thing he'd done countless times before. Step out for air, check something, take a moment. Nothing about it signalled danger. Nothing about the night looked different from any other. The gunshots shattered the quiet. Neighbours who were still awake heard the sharp crack of gunfire breaking through the residential calm of Fort Walton Beach. The sound was unmistakable, urgent, wrong. Some reached for phones immediately. Others hesitated, wondering if they'd heard correctly, if it could be something else. But the silence that followed told them enough. Edgar Jennings lay on his own lawn, steps from his front door. The man who had spent the afternoon filming his daughter's laughter, who had asked if this was her best birthday in all 4 years.
Your best birthday party in all 4 years?
Thank you, Daddy.
You're welcome, baby. I love you very much.
Who had told her he loved her very much. That man was gone. He never made it back inside. Inside the apartment, Stacy and his daughter slept on, unaware. The walls had muffled the shots just enough, or exhaustion had pulled them deep enough into sleep that they didn't wake. The little girl who had torn through birthday presents hours earlier, who had hugged her father between each new gift, remained peacefully asleep in her room, surrounded by the toys he'd given her that afternoon. On the other side of the wall, her father was already beyond saving. Neighbours' 911 calls brought police rushing to the scene, but first responders arrived to a situation already over. There was no rescue to attempt, no life-saving measures that could reverse what had happened in those few seconds of gunfire. Edgar was 35 years old. He would never see his daughter turn 5. The investigation would later reconstruct the timeline with precision. The party, the evening winding down, the moment he stepped outside, the shots. What they wouldn't immediately understand was why. Who would want Edgar Jennings dead? Who benefits when a father is gunned down on his daughter's birthday, mere hours after filming her opening presents? The answer wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It wasn't random violence spilling into a quiet neighborhood. The woman closest to that birthday, the one who should have been grieving hardest, the one whose daughter had just lost her father, had spent months planning for this exact night. She had made arrangements, set a price, ensured the pieces were in place. While Edgar celebrated his daughter's 4th birthday, while he recorded her saying it was her best party ever. The woman who had given birth to that child was counting down the hours until he would be gone. At 35, Edgar Jennings was dead on his own lawn. His daughter's birthday would never be just a birthday again. February 9th would carry both celebration and loss for the rest of her life. And the next morning, the woman who orchestrated it would sit across from a detective and perform grief. The morning after, Edgar Jennings died on his lawn. Carissa Parker sat across from a detective in an interrogation room in Fort Walton Beach. She was 27, the mother of Edgar's 4-year-old daughter. And she had a story to tell about the phone call that had broken her down. She described calling Edgar's mother the night before. I called his mum. I said, "Hi, Miss Linda." And she said, "You know, my son is dead." Carissa recounted how the news had shattered her. She said she hit the floor. She said she couldn't breathe. She said she had a panic attack right there at her friend's house, the kind that left her gasping and shaking. The detective listened, watching her face, her hands, the way she built the scene with words. He wasn't listening for sorrow. He was listening for the shape of a lie. Carissa didn't stop at grief. She shifted quickly into their history, painting a picture of toxicity, volatility, a relationship that had fractured long before Edgar's death. She told the detective that Edgar got mad at her, that he went off on her, that their dynamic had always been broken. We've always been toxic to each other, period. He gets mad at me, he goes off on me. She went further. Edgar was disrespectful, she said, constantly disrespectful. He threatened her. Not with violence, she didn't say that, but with something she framed as equally menacing. Court. The threat of losing custody, of having their daughter taken away, of being dragged into legal battles she couldn't afford. He's very disrespectful to me all the time. He threatens me. He threatens me with court. It was a careful performance. Grief, yes, but also justification. A narrative that positioned Edgar not just as a loss, but as a problem, a source of conflict, someone who had made her life harder. She was framing him before the detective had even asked. She performed grief fluently. The detective was listening for something else, the shape of a lie, not the shape of sorrow. Most people, when describing how they learned of a loved one's death, focus on the shock, the disbelief, the hole left behind. Carissa's account included those beats, but it also included Edgar's flaws, their fights, the ways he had wronged her. She was telling him who Edgar was to her, not just the father of her child, but an antagonist. The detective let her talk. That's what interrogations are for, not to stop someone from speaking, but to let them build the story they think will save them. Every detail Carissa added was another thread he could pull later. Every justification she offered was another question she was answering before he asked it. She told him about the threats of court, the toxic cycle, the way Edgar had treated her. What she didn't tell him, what she carefully omitted, was what she had already set in motion before that birthday party, before the gunshots, before the call to Linda that she claimed had broken her. What she didn't mention was the plan she'd spent months arranging, the price she'd agreed to pay, the person she'd enlisted to make sure Edgar Jennings would never threaten her with court again. Because days before the murder, something had happened that gave her the excuse she needed. The detective kept her talking, and she gave him a name. James, her roommate, days before Edgar's murder. Carissa explained something had happened. James had been accused of something involving her and Edgar's daughter, the exact nature withheld by law enforcement, redacted for the child's protection. But Edgar had taken it seriously enough to threaten legal action. Edgar has been telling me since Sunday that he was going to make a report. Sunday, 2 days before the murder. Edgar had been preparing to file a formal complaint, one that could trigger an investigation, a court order, custody evaluations. Carissa framed it as Edgar's latest threat. But the detective heard something else. Motive. Not for her. For James. If Edgar followed through, if authorities investigated, Carissa could lose custody of her daughter. The child she and Edgar shared could be removed from her home because of James. Edgar wasn't just threatening court anymore. He was threatening to take away the one thing she couldn't afford to lose. Does that sound like something James might kill to prevent? Carissa was quick to defend him. If I would have ever had any inclination that James was capable of something like this, I would have never been talking to him. She insisted there was no basis for Edgar's accusation, no instances where anything inappropriate could have happened. I cannot give you one instance where that would have even been possible. The detective noted her certainty. The way she defended James without hesitation. The way she positioned Edgar's pending report as baseless, vindictive, another weapon in their custody battle. She was building a narrative where Edgar was the aggressor and she and James were victims. But narratives only hold if the facts don't contradict them. For a few minutes, the investigation tilted toward James. If Edgar was about to file a report that could destroy James's life and cost Carissa her daughter, James had reason to want Edgar gone. The timing fit. The stakes fit. The detective quietly filed this away as a possible motive for James. Not yet for her. But even as Carissa explained James's innocence, the detective was watching her, not just listening to what she said, but how she said it. The way she kept redirecting focus away from herself. The way every answer raised another question she wasn't addressing. Why had she been so quick to name James? Why frame the accusation as the catalyst? Unless she needed the detective to believe someone else had stronger reason to kill Edgar. For a few minutes, police believed James might be behind the murder. He had motive, he had proximity. He had been in Carissa's life, in her home, in the orbit of the child Edgar was threatening to take away. Then the questions changed direction toward her, because she had just done something that would seal her fate. As the first interrogation neared its end, the detective made an offer. "You'll take a polygraph." Yes. No hesitation. No pause to consider what it meant or what questions they might ask. Carissa agreed immediately, as if the polygraph was proof she had nothing to hide. The detective told her they had one right next door, and she didn't flinch. She was confident, eager even. This was a woman who believed cooperation would clear her name. Then she went further. She volunteered her phone. Not because the detective asked for it, though he likely would have. She offered it freely, handing over the device like it was evidence in her favor. She made a joke about it, something about how this time it actually matters. The kind of offhand...
But this time, yeah, it has some merit.
She believed the texts and calls would show a mother grieving, a co-parent navigating a toxic relationship, someone who had no reason to want Edgar dead. She thought she'd covered every conversation. She hadn't counted on how much a phone remembers. The detective wasn't finished. Marilyn was just the first name. There would be others. There would be messages that painted a different picture than the grieving, cooperative mother Carissa had performed during the first interrogation. There would be evidence of planning, of anger that went beyond frustration, of conversations that revealed motive. Carissa sat across from him, still trying to maintain the narrative she'd built. But the phone sitting in the detective's evidence folder was already dismantling it, one text message at a time. Because the next text the detective read would be harder to explain away. The detective pressed further, asking about a specific text she'd sent to Marilyn, one about Edgar. "Have you ever told Marilyn that you wanted to kill Edgar?" Carissa didn't deny it. She couldn't. The text was sitting right there in the phone data, time-stamped and archived. So she did what people do when confronted with words they wish they could take back. She admitted it, then tried to explain it away. "I was upset. I did say that. I know I did." She'd said it. She acknowledged it plainly. But the admission came with immediate justification, the kind that rushes out in one breath, like if she could just explain fast enough. The detective would understand it wasn't real, wasn't serious, wasn't something that should matter now. Did I really mean it? Absolutely not. I would never actually want him dead. It was venting, she said. Just words, the kind of thing people say when they're angry and hurt and pushed too far. Edgar had gotten under her skin. He'd disrespected her, threatened her with court, made her feel powerless. So yes, she'd texted Marilyn in a moment of frustration and said something she didn't mean. I was very upset with him. The way he has talked to me, I let him get under my skin sometimes. It's a common defense. People say extreme things when they're emotional. Wanting someone dead in a text message doesn't mean planning to kill them. It means you're angry. Overwhelmed. Looking for someone to understand how much pain you're in. The detective had probably heard this explanation before, maybe dozens of times. But there's a difference between venting to a friend and what comes after. Carissa kept talking, layering explanation on top of justification. She was upset. Edgar pushed her. She let her emotions get the better of her. She texted things she didn't mean. It was just talk. Just frustration spilling over into words that sounded worse than they were. The detective's face didn't change. He already knew what came next. People who vent about wanting someone dead usually stop there. They send the angry text, their friend commiserates or talks them down, and the conversation moves on. The anger fades. Life continues. The person they were mad at stays alive because words and actions are different things. But sometimes the text isn't just venting. Sometimes it's the beginning of a plan. Carissa didn't know that yet. She was still working within the frame of emotional outburst, temporary anger, words she regretted but didn't mean. She thought the explanation would be enough. She thought admitting she'd said it while insisting she didn't mean it would satisfy the detective's concern. She thought she'd explained it away, just venting. Just words. Nothing that mattered. The detective let her finish. Let her build the narrative that this was all emotion, no intention. Let her believe that acknowledging the text, while distancing herself from its meaning, would close that line of questioning. Then he asked her what she sent next, and the next text wouldn't sound like venting at all.
I don't have any goons. Like I said, I was just talking. I was upset and I was angry.
The word hung in the air between them. Goons. Not a word you hear in casual conversation, not a word that sounds innocent even when someone tries to walk it back. Carissa's response came quickly. Defensive, in the way that signals someone knows how bad something sounds. I don't have any goons. I don't hang around anybody like that. She dismissed it immediately, as if the phrase was so absurd it didn't deserve serious consideration. She didn't know any goons. She didn't associate with dangerous people. It was just another example of her being upset, being angry, letting Edgar get under her skin so deeply that she said things that sounded worse than they were. I was just talking. I was upset and I was angry. For a moment, even the detective seemed to treat it as loose talk. People use exaggerated language when they're furious. They say things like, "I'm going to kill him," or "someone should take him out," or "apparently, it's time to call the goons." The phrases sound dramatic, hyperbolic, the kind of thing someone vents to a friend without ever meaning to follow through. But there's a line between venting and planning, between saying you want someone gone and taking steps to make it happen, between writing the word goons in a moment of rage and actually knowing someone who fits that description. The almost missed clue, the word goons, sits right there. plainly stated and still nearly passes as hyperbole. Carissa was adamant. She didn't have goons. She didn't run in circles where people hired muscle or called in favors from dangerous contacts. She was a mother, a former co-worker to people like Marilyn, someone navigating a custody battle with an ex who made her life difficult. The idea that she would know anyone capable of violence, let alone someone she'd refer to as a goon, was absurd. The detective let her explanation sit, didn't challenge it immediately, didn't press her on what she meant by the phrase, or why she'd use that specific word if she didn't actually know anyone it could apply to. He just noted it, the way he'd noted everything else, cataloguing her responses, watching how she defended herself, building a picture of what she was willing to admit versus what she was desperate to deny. Because words matter, especially when they turn out to be accurate. People don't usually say "call the goons" unless they have someone specific in mind, unless there's a contact, a name, a person they believe could do what they're asking. Venting sounds like, "I wish he'd just disappear," or "someone should deal with him." It doesn't sound like, "time to call the goons." That sounds like a plan. Carissa swore she didn't hang around anyone like that. She insisted the phrase was meaningless, just anger spilling over into words she'd regret later. She wanted the detective to believe it was hyperbole, exaggeration, the kind of thing that sounds bad in hindsight, but meant nothing in the moment. She was already hanging around exactly the man the word described, because the detective was about to tell her who her marijuana dealer really was. The detective laid out what they'd found about her associates specifically. About a man she knew as TG. Who is TG? Just a friend of mine. A friend. Jordan Phillips. The man who occasionally sold her marijuana, though Carissa framed the relationship as social rather than transactional. She knew him by his street name, the two letters everyone used instead of his real identity. "You know his name? I only know him as TG." She didn't offer more, didn't volunteer that she'd texted him, that he'd been to her house, that they had enough of a relationship for her to reach out when she needed something. The detective let the silence sit, then pressed further. "What's his Facebook name?" "TG Phillips." She knew his last name, then. Not just the street moniker, but enough to find him on social media, to maintain contact beyond the occasional transaction. The detective nodded, then asked the question that would close the loop. "It's not goon." "No." The answer came quickly. But the detective had the records. He knew what Jordan Phillips was called in law enforcement databases, what nickname appeared next to his name in files Carissa had never seen. Well, he's labelled in other databases as the Goon as a nickname. The room shifted. Not visibly, Carissa didn't gasp or break down, but the weight of the connection settled between them. She'd texted Marilyn about calling the Goons. Her marijuana dealer, someone she knew well enough to text. Well enough to have at her house, was nicknamed Goon in police records. The detective watched her recalibrate in real time, deciding how much to concede and how much to still deny.
Be very careful, because I've got answers that I don't think you know I know.
Okay, well, I did not know that. It was the only answer she could give. Admitting she knew would tie her directly to the text. Would confirm that "call the goons" wasn't hyperbole, but a specific reference to a specific person. Denying knowledge let her maintain that it was all coincidence. But coincidences have limits. You can say you wanted someone dead and claim you didn't mean it. You can text about calling the gooms and insist it was just venting. But when the person you know carries the exact nickname you used, coincidence stops being plausible. The detective didn't argue, didn't press her on whether she really didn't know. He just let the fact sit there. Another piece of evidence that didn't need interpretation. She'd said it was time to call the goons. Her marijuana dealer was called Goon. She claimed ignorance. Does that sound like coincidence? One more coincidence, the detective told her, that just didn't add up. She'd texted about calling the goons, and her marijuana dealer carried that exact nickname. But the phone had more to reveal than just words. The detective walked through her timeline, minute by minute, pulling up the text messages from the night Edgar died. Not just the messages to Marilyn or the reference to goons, but the practical logistics of where Carissa was, who she was with, and what she'd told people about her plans. He focused on the car. Kira's car, to be specific. Carissa had borrowed it that night. The text exchange was time-stamped, archived, ready to be read back to her. "What time will you be back?" Carissa had answered plainly. "It takes an hour to get there and an hour to get back, so maybe by midnight." The detective let that sit for a moment. An hour there, an hour back, 2 hours of driving, round trip. She'd told Kira she'd be gone long enough for a significant drive, long enough that midnight was a reasonable estimate for when she'd return. Then he asked the question that would unravel her alibi. What takes an hour Walmart is about 15 minutes from her house. Silence. Carissa had claimed she borrowed the car to go to Walmart, a quick errand, a short trip, nothing unusual. But the math didn't work. Walmart was 15 minutes away, maybe 20 with traffic, even accounting for time inside the store. The entire trip, drive there, shop, drive back, shouldn't take more than 45 minutes. She'd told Kyra it would take 2 hours. The detective didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The math did the work. Timelines are unforgiving. They don't bend to accommodate lies. When someone says a 15-minute trip will take an hour, there's an hour of road that needs explaining. And Carissa didn't have an explanation that fit the story she'd been telling. He pressed her, not aggressively, but methodically. Every answer she'd given so far had left gaps, inconsistencies, details that didn't align. Now he was laying them out, one by one, showing her that the phone she'd handed over so confidently had recorded every contradiction. "Be very careful, because I've got answers that I don't think you know I know." It was a warning and a strategy. The detective had more than she realized. He had the phone data, the text timestamps, the impossible timeline, the connection to TG. He had pieces she thought were buried or irrelevant, and he was putting them together in front of her, showing her that the story she'd built couldn't hold. Carissa shifted. Not a full confession. Not yet. But a crack. The kind of shift that happens when someone realizes denial won't work anymore. When the evidence is too clear and the lies too thin. She admitted she let TG drive the car that night. Not the whole truth. Not what he did with it. Not where he went. Not why she'd lent it to him hours before Edgar was killed. But it was the first real admission. The first piece of her story that aligned with what the detective already knew. She had just handed him something no lie could undo. An hour of road she couldn't explain. And the detective already knew what filled it. Because he'd been building toward this moment from the start. With the lie exposed, the detective pushed for what happened during that hour. Where exactly did TG go? Where'd you go after that? I went to TG's house. That's where he took the car. Carissa had given up the timeline lie. Now she was adjusting, recalibrating what she could admit and what she needed to withhold. She'd gone to TG's house, not to Walmart. She'd let him take the car, not driven it herself. The story was shifting, piece by piece, as the detective dismantled each version she offered. TG's house. The man whose nickname was Goon. The man she'd texted about in the days before Edgar's murder. The man who'd taken a borrowed car for reasons she claimed not to fully understand. She was connecting herself to him more directly now, admitting proximity, admitting access, admitting that the hour of unexplained road led straight to his door. The detective didn't let her stop there. He say where he was going. He said he had to go hit a lick. That's what he said. Hit a lick. Street slang. The kind of phrase that sounds vague until you know what it means. Carissa offered it plainly, as if it explained everything, as if the detective would understand and move on. But he didn't move on. What's that mean to you? Sell drugs. That's what it's called. Hitting a lick. She was framing it as something minor, something unrelated to murder. TG needed to make a quick sale. Needed the car for 30 minutes. Needed to handle some business that had nothing to do with Edgar Jennings lying dead on his lawn. She was giving the detective an alternative explanation, a reason for the car, for the hour, for TG's involvement that kept it all in the realm of small-time drug dealing rather than murder for hire. She's calibrating her story in real time, giving up just enough to seem cooperative. Every answer she offered was carefully measured. She admitted what the detective could already prove. Yes, she went to TG's house. Yes. He took the car. Yes. She knew he was involved in selling drugs, but she stopped short of admitting what those facts meant when assembled together. She was treating each piece of evidence as isolated, unconnected, a series of unfortunate coincidences rather than a deliberate plan. The detective let her talk, let her build the narrative she thought would save her, let her explain TG's 30-minute absence as a drug run, as if that made sense. As if borrowing a car for a quick sale required the kind of planning and timing that aligned perfectly with Edgar's murder. 30 minutes, she said. He was only gone about 30 minutes. She framed it as brief, insignificant, just long enough for a transaction and a return. She didn't yet know the detective already knew what filled them. 30 minutes is enough time to drive to someone's house, wait for the right moment, pull a trigger, and drive back. 30 minutes is enough time to commit murder if you know where you're going and what you're doing. 30 minutes is enough time to end a life and return a borrowed car before anyone realizes how far you've really gone. Because the phone had told a different story entirely. The detective laid out the full digital timeline for the first time, walking Carissa through every text the phone remembered. Not just the messages from the night Edgar died, but the pattern leading up to it. The history that showed not impulse, but intention. He started with September. On September 4th, you texted TG and said, "I'm here. I need an eighth." A drug purchase. Carissa buying marijuana from TG, the kind of transaction they'd had before, the kind that established their relationship as dealer and customer. Nothing unusual about it on its face. People buy drugs, they text their dealers, they arrange pickups. But then the detective pointed out what came after. Nothing. No contact, no follow-up purchases, no casual check-ins, no friendly texts, no reaching out for another transaction. For 2 months, Carissa and TG, two people who had an established relationship, who texted about drug deals, who knew each other well enough for her to call him when she needed something, went completely silent. You don't talk to him again until November 18th. That's very suspicious. 2 months of silence. Then contact the night before Edgar dies. The gap itself told a story. People who buy drugs regularly don't go 2 months without reaching out. They run out. They need more. They make contact. But Carissa didn't. She went silent for 60 days, as if she didn't need TG for what she usually needed him for, as if she was waiting for something else. Before I reveal what those November 18th texts actually said, before I
heard it, if you put a potato on a barrel and keep it quiet or something, she was asking me about a pillow,
Then she signed the waiver anyway, put her name on the form that said she understood her rights and was choosing to waive them. Choosing to keep talking. Choosing to continue the performance even when a lawyer would have told her to stop. I know I lied, and I'm sorry. I'm completely terrified of that man. She was pivoting again, reframing. Yes, she'd lied, but only because she was scared. Terrified of TG, the man she'd texted, the man whose car she'd driven, the man she'd put in position to kill Edgar. She was positioning herself as a victim, someone coerced or manipulated, someone who deserved sympathy rather than a murder charge. Even after arrest, with a lawyer available, she signed the waiver and kept talking, still believing she could perform her way out. She said she was terrified of TG. In minutes, the detective would show her exactly why that story didn't hold. Because TG had already told his own version of the truth. The detective didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He laid out the evidence piece by piece, methodical and complete. Not theories anymore, not questions. Just the documented sequence of what had happened, presented plainly enough that no performance could explain it away. Carissa's car had been at TG's house in the days before the murder. Phone data confirmed it. TG had been at Carissa's house hours before Edgar was killed. Witnesses confirmed it. A gun had been purchased with characteristics matching the murder weapon. TG knew the layout of Edgar's home, knew which door, knew exactly where to wait. The timeline of movements matched the phone records down to the minute. Every piece fit, every gap she tried to leave in her story was filled with documentation she couldn't deny. Then the detective told her what TG had said. Not speculation, not the detective's interpretation. TG's own confession, given separately, without Carissa in the room to coordinate stories or manage the narrative.
You showed him. You drove him to the house. Okay? You knew he had a gun. Okay?
TG had told them everything. $10,000. That was the price. $5,000 up front, $5,000 promised after tax season when Carissa said she'd have the money. A murder-for-hire arrangement negotiated and agreed upon with a payment structure that proved this wasn't impulse or fear. It was a transaction. TG had described the method. The quiet way, he'd called it. A potato used as a makeshift suppressor on the barrel. An attempt to muffle the sound when he fired through Edgar's bathroom door. He'd confirmed the details, the house, the timing. The moment Edgar Jennings died. Every piece of evidence the detective presented wasn't new information. It was the removal of every escape route Carissa thought she had. She'd spent hours performing. admitting just enough to seem honest, denying just enough to avoid murder, threading the needle between cooperation and self-preservation. But the needle had run out of thread. There was nowhere left to maneuver, no version of events that explained the car, the texts, the timeline, the payment, TG's confession. This wasn't justice finding its way. This was the end of a story that should never have been written. The detective recounted it all without emotion. The planning, the payment, the execution. Edgar Jennings, filming his daughter's 4th birthday, had no idea that the woman who'd given birth to that child had already arranged for someone to kill him, had negotiated a price, had driven the shooter to his home, had ensured he knew which door to target. Carissa sat across from him, the performance finally over. No more explanations, no more justifications. No more claims of being terrified or manipulated or misunderstood. The evidence had spoken louder than any story she could tell after hours of performance. Carissa's final words weren't denial or explanation. They were 4 words she should have said at the beginning. "I want a lawyer." The interrogation ended there. The detective stood. The room fell silent. Carissa had finally stopped talking, but only after every piece of the case had been laid bare, after TG's confession had closed every gap she'd tried to leave open. Edgar's name was the last thing said before the silence. The courtroom was full, but no one looked at each other. Carissa Parker sat at the defense table in a beige jumpsuit, hands folded, face blank. Jordan Phillips was at a separate table across the aisle, his attorney beside him, his posture rigid. Edgar's family occupied the front row on the prosecution side. The air felt vacuum-sealed. The judge, a woman in her 50s with grey-streaked hair and reading glasses on a chain, sat elevated at the bench, reviewing documents without expression. She'd presided over dozens of murder cases. This one had all the usual components: premeditation, motive, a dead body, digital evidence. What made it unusual was how clearly the digital trail had mapped the conspiracy. Most cases required inference. This one had timestamps. She looked up. "Miss Parker, please rise." Carissa stood. Her attorney stood beside her. The room held its breath. "You have been found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Edgar Jennings. The court hereby sentences you to 53 years in the Florida Department of Corrections." 53 years. No gasp, no outburst, just the sound of pen on paper as the court reporter recorded it. "For the murder of Edgar Jennings," the judge continued, her tone flat, procedural. "You will serve this sentence without eligibility for early release under state statute. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Carissa said. Her voice didn't waver. She sat back down. The judge turned to the other table. "Mr. Phillips, please rise." Jordan stood. His hands were shaking. "You have been found guilty of second-degree murder with a firearm. The court hereby sentences you to 40 years in the Florida Department of Corrections." 40 years. He would be in his 60s when he got out. If he got out. 40 years, second-degree murder with a firearm, the judge said. "Do you understand the terms of this sentence?" "Yes, ma'am." 2 sentences, legally sufficient, but they still wouldn't give a 4-year-old her father back. The judge made a final note, closed the file, and looked out over the courtroom. She'd done this part of the job long enough to know that sentencing never felt like resolution. It felt like punctuation, a period at the end of a sentence that couldn't be unwritten. "This court is adjourned," she said, and brought the gavel down once. The sound echoed. Carissa was led out first, hands cuffed behind her back. She didn't look at Edgar's family as she passed. Jordan followed moments later, his head down, shoulders slumped. The gallery began to empty. Attorneys packing briefcases, family members standing slowly, journalists filing out to meet their deadlines. 53 years. 40 years. The math was clean. The law had been applied. The system had processed the case from crime scene to conviction to sentencing, and now it was complete. The case was closed. The file went into archives. The courtroom emptied. The system moved on. But there were people for whom February 9th, 2018 would never be over. For one person, the verdict changed nothing at all. The courtroom had emptied. The case was archived. Carissa Parker and Jordan Phillips were led to separate prisons to begin serving their decades. The legal machinery had turned, processed, and delivered its outcome. But none of that reached the one person whose life had been fractured most completely. Edgar's daughter, the 4-year-old, who would forever carry February 9th as both celebration and loss, had not been in the courtroom. She was too young to sit through the trial, too young to understand what a 53-year sentence meant, too young to make sense of why her mother wouldn't be coming home. She had lost her father to violence. She had lost her mother to the choice that caused it. And she would grow up in the care of others. Raised by family members who loved her but could never fill the dual absence. No grandmother, no aunt, no guardian could be both parents at once. The system had named her mother a murderer and her father a victim. And those labels didn't account for what a child loses when both are gone. February 9th would come around every year. Candles and cake and singing. And underneath all of it, the knowledge, once she was old enough to carry it, that this was also the morning her father was shot to death in a gas station parking lot because her mother had wanted him gone. Most children get to separate their birthday from grief. She wouldn't. Every year, the same date. Celebration and loss. Tangled so tightly there was no way to pull them apart. She'd blow out candles, make wishes, open presents, and somewhere in the same breath remember that this was the day it all ended. The timeline wouldn't let her forget. The calendar wouldn't let her separate. 53 years. 40 years. 4 years old. Carissa would serve her sentence in a Florida prison. Eligible for nothing, bound to those walls until she was elderly. Jordan would serve his aging through decades behind bars. Both would have time to reflect, to regret, to wrestle with what they'd done. But Edgar's daughter would serve a different kind of sentence, one with no parole, no end date, no possibility of release. She would carry February 9th, 2018 for the rest of her life. Every birthday a reminder, every celebration shadowed. She hadn't chosen any of it, hadn't asked to be born on a day that would later become a crime scene timestamp, hadn't done anything to deserve a childhood where both parents were gone before she could form memories of them together. The legal system had done what it could. It had delivered sentences, archived evidence, closed the case. But it couldn't give back what was taken on a birthday morning in 2018. February 9th keeps coming back. The legal system did what it could, delivered its verdicts, filed its evidence, archived its case folders, but it couldn't stop the calendar. It couldn't give back a father. It couldn't separate a child's birthday from the morning her parent was killed. Edgar Jennings exists now in fragments, recordings, photos. The birthday video he started but never finished. His voice survives in digital files, frozen at the age he was when he died 34. A father in the middle of singing to his daughter, a man who thought he had years ahead. The voice outlasted the man. It plays without him. His daughter hears it sometimes, or will when she's older. Happy birthday to you. A line